My name is Evelyn Hayes, and I used to believe that love was measured in sacrifice. I used to believe that a mother's worth was etched in the lines of her worn hands, the sleepless nights, the quiet relinquishing of her own dreams for the sake of her children's. I used to believe that. Now I know better. The first scar, the one that truly changed me, wasn't physical. It was a digital wound carved into the public square of the internet for all the world to see. It began subtly, as most slow poisons do. A cryptic post from my daughter Sarah on Instagram. Something about healing from generational trauma and breaking free from toxic cycles. I saw it, felt a familiar pang of unease, but dismissed it. Sarah had always been dramatic, a flair for the theatrical, even in her casual grievances. I told myself she was just venting, as young people do. Then came David's post, my son, usually more reserved, more calculating. His Facebook update was less poetic, more direct, grateful to finally be able to breathe freely. Some relationships, even family, just aren't worth the cost to your soul. He didn't tag me, didn't name me, but the subtext was a siren wail. It was unmistakable. My children, my flesh and blood, were broadcasting their disassociation from me. I remember that day with chilling clarity. The morning sun, usually a cheerful harbinger of a new day, felt oppressive, heavy. I was sitting at my kitchen table, nursing a cup of tea, idly scrolling through my phone, when I saw David's post. My heart, a muscle I thought was steel-plated after decades of trials, fluttered, then began to pound with a frantic rhythm. I felt a cold dread seep into my bones, a premonition of something truly terrible. My immediate reaction was confusion. What had I done? Had I missed some crucial conversation, some unspoken plea for understanding? My mind raced through recent interactions. A slightly terse phone call about David's new, expensive hobby. A disagreement with Sarah about her latest career pivot, which involved significant financial outlay from my pocket. Nothing, I thought, that warranted such public denouncements. The comments started trickling in. So proud of you for setting boundaries. You deserve happiness, David. Toxic parents are the worst. Each notification was a fresh stab. Strangers, acquaintances, even some of my own friends, liking and commenting, adding fuel to a fire I didn't even know had been lit. They didn't know the story. They didn't know me, but they were so quick to judge, so eager to align with the narrative of the wronged child. Sarah's post, originally vague, now seemed to solidify into a specific accusation. A picture of her looking wistful, captioned, "Learning to release the weight of expectations and control." It's a journey. Friends flooded her comments with emojis of support and validation. You're so strong, honey. You've been through so much. I felt a dizzying mix of anger, hurt, and profound bewilderment. Was this a collective delusion? Had I, Evelyn Hayes, truly been the villain they now painted me as? For a fleeting moment, I doubted myself. Years of second-guessing, of putting their needs before my own, had conditioned me to always question if I had done enough, been enough. But this felt different. This felt like a carefully orchestrated attack. My husband, Thomas, a man of quiet strength and unwavering loyalty, found me that evening staring blankly at the wall. He took one look at my face, read the unspoken anguish in my eyes, and gently took my phone from my trembling hand. He scrolled through the posts, his jaw tightening with each passing word. "They're going too far, Evie," he said, his voice low, laced with a protectiveness that warmed a small part of my frozen heart. "This isn't just venting. This is a public execution." I nodded, tears finally blurring my vision. "But why, Thomas? Why would they do this?" He sighed, pulling me into a comforting embrace. "Because, my love, it's easier to paint you as a monster than to admit they're the ones who've taken everything." His words, though painful, were a jolt of cold reality. It wasn't about my parenting mistakes, if any. It was about something far more insidious. It was about narrative control. It was about justifying their actions, or rather, their inaction, their entitlement. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake, the accusations swirling in my mind like a venomous fog. Toxic. Controlling. Unsupportive. These words, flung carelessly into the digital ether, were sticking. They were forming a new identity for me, one I didn't recognize, one I certainly didn't deserve. But somewhere, in the deep recesses of my exhaustion and despair, a tiny ember of defiance began to glow. Thomas was right. They had taken everything, my money, my time, my peace of mind, but they would not take my truth, not anymore. This was the moment the quiet, sacrificing mother began to fight back. For a long time, I lived by an unwritten code. A mother does not complain. A mother endures. A mother gives. My children, Sarah and David, were my world. From the moment I held them, tiny and fragile, I pledged every fiber of my being to their well-being, their happiness, their success. I remember my own childhood, growing up with parents who struggled, who instilled in me the value of hard work and self-reliance, but also a deep-seated fear of lack. I vowed my children would never feel that pinch, that worry. They would have opportunities I could only dream of. When Sarah was born, a tiny bundle of fiery red hair and boundless energy, I was working 2 part-time jobs while Thomas built his small construction business from the ground up. We were young, hopeful, and sleep-deprived. David followed 2 years later, a calm, observant child who seemed to absorb the world through his big, thoughtful eyes. Every penny we earned was meticulously divided. Rent, food, bills, and then a precious, sacred portion set aside for the kids' future. We started college funds the moment they could crawl. We sacrificed vacations, new cars, even comfortable furniture, telling ourselves it was worth it. Their future was our future. I chose to be a stay-at-home mom for their formative years, a luxury Thomas's burgeoning business allowed, but one that came with its own silent costs. I lost momentum in my own career aspirations, watching former colleagues climb corporate ladders while I navigated playdates and school fundraisers. But I told myself it was for them, for their stability, their emotional well-being. And in those early years, it genuinely felt right. Their laughter was my reward. Their achievements, no matter how small, were my triumphs. But as they grew, so did their needs, and more subtly, their expectations. They attended the best schools, wore branded clothes because everyone else has them, Mom, and participated in every extracurricular activity imaginable: soccer, ballet, debate club, piano lessons. Each activity came with fees, uniforms, equipment, and countless hours of chauffeuring. I became a human taxi service, a cheerleader, a tutor, a short-order cook. Thomas and I worked tirelessly. He put in 60-hour weeks on construction sites, coming home bone-weary but always with a gentle smile for the kids. I managed the household, volunteered at their schools, and eventually, as they entered middle school, took on freelance writing jobs from home to supplement our income. I didn't want them to feel deprived. I wanted them to have everything. The first real crack in my idyllic vision of motherhood appeared when Sarah was 15. She desperately wanted to go on a school trip to Europe. It was expensive, far more than we had budgeted for. Thomas was hesitant, suggesting a more affordable summer camp. But Sarah pleaded, tears welling in her eyes, telling me how everyone was going, how she'd be left out and miserable if she couldn't. My heart, ever soft for my children, caved. I dipped into our emergency savings, rationalizing it as an educational investment. When she came back, full of stories and souvenirs, a new confidence gleaming in her eyes, I felt a surge of pride. This was why I worked so hard. This was worth it. But a small, persistent voice whispered, did she truly appreciate the sacrifice? Or did she just expect it? I pushed the thought away. Mothers don't think like that. David was more subtle in his demands. He was academically brilliant, destined for an Ivy League school, or so we believed. His ambitions were grand, and we spared no expense for his SAT prep courses, his specialized tutors, his application fees. When he was accepted into a prestigious university with a partial scholarship, we were ecstatic. The remaining tuition, living expenses, and experiential learning costs were astronomical. But we found a way. We always found a way. Thomas took on a second, evening job as a security guard. I doubled my freelance workload, often writing late into the night, fueled by instant coffee and a fierce determination. "It's an investment, Evie," Thomas would say, rubbing my tired shoulders. "Their education is the best legacy we can give them." And I believed him. I truly did. But the years of investment began to take their toll. Our own lives were put on hold. Our house, once a cozy family hub, started to show its age. The roof needed repairs, the kitchen was outdated, our car was clinging to life with duct tape and prayers. But the kids needed new laptops, new phones, money for networking events, and internship travel. When Thomas and I finally got around to thinking about our own retirement, the numbers were grim. We had diligently contributed to our 401 kiloseconds, but the massive outflows for the kids had left a gaping hole. We would have to work longer, harder. But again, we justified it. Our children were thriving. Sarah had a promising career in marketing. David was climbing the corporate ladder in finance. They were successful. That was our reward. The gradual erosion of my sense of self was almost imperceptible. I became mom, defined solely by my role as provider and supporter. My hobbies fell by the wayside. My friendships thinned, as I rarely had the time or energy for social outings. My identity became inextricably linked to my children's achievements, their happiness, their needs. Then came the wedding. Sarah's wedding. A lavish affair she insisted had to be perfect and unforgettable. She presented us with a budget that made my eyes water. "Mom, Dad, this is a once-in-a-lifetime thing. You want me to have the wedding of my dreams, right?" Of course we did. So we agreed to cover the lion's share. Thomas even offered to do all the renovations on the old, historical venue she chose, saving us thousands in labor costs, at the expense of his weekends for months. I coordinated vendors, managed RSVPs, and listened to endless debates about flower arrangements and bridesmaid dress colors. The day itself was beautiful, picture perfect. Sarah looked radiant. I felt a surge of love and exhaustion. I also felt a deep, hollow ache in my wallet. David's trajectory was equally demanding, though less overtly emotional. His financial career took off, but so did his desire for an equally impressive lifestyle. He needed a down payment for his first apartment in a trendy part of the city. Then, a few years later, a down payment for a house as, "The market was only going up, Mom. You wouldn't want me to miss out." He'd hint, subtly, about needing a loan for a new car, for a startup investment, always with the promise of paying us back, a promise that rarely materialized. Each request was framed as a stepping stone to their success, a necessary component of their adult lives. And each time, Thomas and I dipped into our savings, took out small lines of credit, or simply tightened our belts even further. We were their safety net, their endless wellspring of support. And we believed, truly believed, that this was what good parents did. This was love, until the day they decided to cut me off. Until the day they called me toxic. That's when I finally began my reckoning. That's when I understood. The love had been there, yes, from my end, but somewhere along the way, it had become a transaction for them. A one-way street of expectation and entitlement. And I, Evelyn Hayes, was no longer willing to pay the toll. The public posts were the final straw, but the unraveling had been slow, insidious. It began years ago, perhaps even decades, with tiny threads snapping, unnoticed, until the whole fabric of our relationship lay in tatters. The first clear sign of their detachment wasn't an argument, but an absence. It was the increasingly infrequent phone calls, the missed family dinners, the convenient excuses. "So busy with work, Mom. Just slammed this week. David will call you back." I'd tell myself it was normal. They were adults now, building their own lives. But the silence grew heavier. Then came the subtle condescension. When I offered advice, rooted in decades of life experience, it was met with a dismissive wave or a patronizing smile. "Oh, Mom, things are different now. You just don't understand the market," David would say, as if my understanding of money had vanished with the invention of cryptocurrency. Sarah would roll her eyes when I suggested a more practical approach to her latest venture. "Mom, this is art. You just don't get it." The worst part was the way they talked about my life, or rather, the lack of interest. My freelance writing, my small gardening successes, my attempts to re-engage with old friends, all met with a polite but distant nod, quickly redirected back to their own triumphs or grievances. I felt like a supporting character in their grand narratives, a convenient resource, but never a protagonist in my own right. The demands, though never truly ceasing, shifted. They became less about specific needs and more about maintaining a certain lifestyle. David wanted to upgrade his car, but instead of asking for a loan, he'd subtly complain about his unreliable vehicle when Thomas and I were around, knowing it would stir our protective instincts. Sarah wanted to expand her wellness brand, implying that without a significant financial boost from us, her entire dream might collapse. "Mom, I just need a little seed money," she'd say, her voice soft and persuasive. "This could be huge. Think of the impact." And I'd think of my dwindling savings, and then of her earnest, hopeful face, and I'd cave. Because what kind of mother crushes her daughter's dreams? The most painful shift was the way they treated Thomas, my strong, hard-working husband, who had bent over backwards for them, was now viewed as merely a useful handyman. When their own homes needed repairs, David and Sarah would call Thomas first, expecting him to drop everything and fix their leaky faucets or paint their spare rooms, always with the assumption that his labor was free, an extension of his parental duty. He never complained, but I saw the lines of exhaustion deepening around his eyes, the silent weariness in his slumped shoulders after a long day at his paying job, followed by an evening fixing their minor emergencies. The breaking point, before the social media fiasco, was David's housewarming party. He had recently bought a beautiful, expensive home, almost entirely financed by Thomas and me. We had put down a significant portion of the down payment and co-signed a loan, enabling him to get a favorable mortgage rate. We arrived, dressed in our best, feeling a mix of pride and apprehension. The house was magnificent. He had spared no expense on renovations, decor, and a sprawling gourmet kitchen. We beamed, looking at the fruit of our sacrifices. But when we tried to mingle, to genuinely connect with him, he was distant, preoccupied with his important friends, his business contacts. He introduced us, almost as an afterthought, as my parents, with a tone that suggested we were more a historical footnote than active participants in his life. Later that evening, I overheard him talking to a friend. "Yeah, this place was a steal. My parents helped out a bit with the down payment, bless their hearts. They're so old-fashioned, always wanting to help. But hey, it got me where I am, right?" He laughed, a casual, dismissive sound that pierced through me. "A bit?" I thought, my heart sinking. Bless their hearts? It felt like a backhanded compliment, a polite dismissal of our immense contribution. I looked at Thomas across the room, who was quietly fixing a loose hinge on a cabinet for David's wife. He caught my eye, and in that fleeting moment I saw his weariness, his quiet hurt, reflected in my own. We had become invisible. We were just the bank, the free labor, the background characters in their glorious lives. That night, as we drove home in silence, the air thick with unspoken disappointment, I knew something had to change. But what? How do you sever ties with the children you poured your entire life into? How do you tell them that their loving parents were actually just convenient stepping stones? Then came the social media posts, the public shaming, the accusations of toxicity. It was a betrayal so profound, so absolute, that it finally severed the last fragile threads that bound me to the narrative of endless sacrifice. I realized then that they didn't just see me as an ATM or a maid. They saw me as an obstacle to their self-aggrandizing story, a convenient villain to justify their growing independence and lack of reciprocal care. My toxicity wasn't about anything I did. It was about the uncomfortable truth of what they had become. And in that moment, the hurt coalesced into a cold, clear resolve. Enough was enough. The ledger was about to be balanced. The morning after David's and Sarah's public denunciations, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The fog of maternal obligation had lifted, replaced by a chilling realization. They were not just ungrateful, they were actively harming me, destroying my reputation, twisting my love into something ugly. Thomas found me in my home office, a room rarely used since the kids left, now covered in dust sheets. I was pulling out old filing cabinets, their metal drawers groaning in protest as I opened them. "Evie, what are you doing?" he asked, concern etched on his face. "I'm opening the books, Thomas," I said, my voice steady, devoid of the usual tremor of hurt. "I'm going to find every single receipt, every single payment, every single loan, every single sacrifice." He watched me for a moment, then a slow smile spread across his face. "Good," he said, and went to get the coffee. For the next 2 weeks, my office became my sanctuary, my battleground. I delved into the meticulously kept financial records of our lives. My natural inclination for organization, once a source of gentle teasing from the kids, now became my most powerful weapon. I had kept everything. Not out of paranoia, but out of a deeply ingrained habit from my financially insecure upbringing. Every bank statement, every canceled check, every credit card bill, every school invoice, every medical record, every utility payment, all neatly filed, year by year, category by category. It was an unintentional archive of our family's entire financial history, and more importantly, the history of my love, quantified. The process was excruciating. Each document was a memory, a ghost. 1990s. School tuition bills for Sarah's elite preschool, David's private elementary school. Receipts for countless toys, clothes, books. Bank statements showing automatic transfers to their college savings accounts, even when our own account balance was precariously low. 2000s. High school fees, extracurricular activity invoices, ballet, soccer, debate, SAT prep. Plane tickets for Sarah's European trip, David's summer science camp. Receipts for brand name sneakers they insisted they needed to fit in. 2010s. University tuition statements for both room and board expenses, textbooks, laptops, living expenses that always seemed to exceed the actual cost of living. David's first loan for his startup, a significant sum never repaid. Sarah's credit card statements, paid by me when she inevitably overspent. The down payment for David's first apartment. The substantial contributions to Sarah's lavish wedding. Thomas's construction invoices for all the free labor on her venue and David's first house. 2020s. More loans for David's business ventures, none of which ever truly materialized into profit or repayment. Financial aid for Sarah's passion project, quote, a spiritual retreat that cost a fortune. Regular payments for their car insurance, health insurance, and even some of their utility bills, which they conveniently forgot to pay. As I sorted through the mountains of paper, the initial surge of anger began to morph into something else, a cold, hard ache of realization. It wasn't just money. It was time. It was energy. It was a lifetime of emotional investment, meticulously documented in dollars and cents. I created a master spreadsheet. Each row was a specific expense. Date, recipient, Sarah or David. Description and exact amount. I categorized them. Education, living expenses, healthcare, gifts/loans, special events. I even included a conservative estimate for Thomas's unpaid labor, based on market rates for a skilled contractor. The numbers were staggering. Far more than I had ever consciously tallied. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Money that could have been our retirement nest egg, our security, our freedom. Money that could have been used for our own medical needs, for much-needed home repairs, for a comfortable, worry-free old age. Instead, it had flowed into their lives, seemingly endlessly, until they decided they no longer needed the source. Thomas would bring me meals, sometimes sitting silently beside me, just holding my hand. He knew the pain of this inventory, the painful truth each receipt unveiled. "It's a lot, isn't it?" he'd say softly, looking at the growing spreadsheet on my screen. "It's a lifetime, Thomas," I'd reply, my voice hoarse from hours of dry accounting, a lifetime of everything. As I compiled the final figures, a quiet rage settled deep within me. It wasn't a wild, explosive anger, but a cold, burning fire of injustice. They had called me toxic. They had painted me as a controlling, manipulative mother. They had publicly shamed me for setting boundaries, for finally saying no. But this ledger told a different story. This ledger told a story of unconditional love, yes, but also of profound sacrifice, of quiet generosity, of a relentless effort to give them every possible advantage. And now, this ledger would speak for me. I decided not to just present the numbers. I would present the context, the sacrifice, the love behind each expense. I would create a narrative that laid bare the truth, not with accusations, but with undeniable facts. Each receipt was a silent witness to a moment of my life, a piece of my heart, an offering. And now, those offerings would be counted. With the ledger complete, the question became how to present it. A private conversation was out of the question. They had made this public. A confrontational email or text would simply be dismissed, spun as more toxic behavior. No, this required a different approach, a stage as public as the one they had chosen. YouTube, Thomas suggested one evening, as I was staring at my meticulously compiled spreadsheet, a digital weapon ready for deployment. They live online, Evie. That's where you need to meet them. I was hesitant. I was not a tech-savvy person. My online presence was minimal. A few Facebook posts, an occasional comment. The thought of creating a video, of putting myself out there, was terrifying. But the alternative, remaining silent, letting their narrative solidify, was worse. Thomas, ever my rock, took charge. He researched basic video editing software, helped me set up a simple camera, my phone, propped on a stack of books, and ensured the lighting was adequate. "You don't need fancy production, Evie," he said. "You just need your truth." I spent days writing the script. It wasn't just a list of expenses. It was my story, my perspective, my grief, and my anger. I wanted to start with the deep emotional wound they had inflicted, then slowly, methodically, reveal the layers of my sacrifice. I decided to address them directly, but not just them. I wanted to address their friends, their followers, and anyone who might come across the video. I wanted them to understand that a mother's love, while often invisible, is quantifiable, profound, and deserving of respect, not public scorn. The hardest part was deciding what tone to strike. I didn't want to sound bitter or vengeful, even though those emotions simmered beneath the surface. I wanted to sound heartbroken, resolute, and, above all, truthful. I wanted to explain why I had done what I had done, and why their betrayal cut so deeply. I rehearsed tirelessly. My voice cracked sometimes when I spoke of the earliest sacrifices, the pure, unadulterated love I felt for them as children. It hardened when I recounted the demands, the casual dismissals, the coldness of their eventual betrayal. Thomas sat through every rehearsal, offering quiet encouragement, reminding me to breathe, to look directly into the lens. "Remember, Evie," he'd say, "this isn't about shaming them for the sake of it. It's about protecting yourself. It's about setting the record straight. It's about your dignity." Finally, the day came to record. I wore a simple, professional blouse, my hair neatly tied back. I wanted to project an image of calm authority, not a hysterical, emotional mother. I took a deep breath, looked into the camera lens, and began to speak. "My name is Evelyn Hayes," I started, my voice wavering slightly but holding steady. "And for 30 years, I have poured every ounce of my being, every spare penny, every waking moment, into raising my 2 children, Sarah and David." And then I began to tell my story. I held up printed out receipts, pointed to charts on a whiteboard Thomas had set up, showing the cumulative totals. I spoke of the rice and beans dinners, the deferred vacations, the loans taken out in my name. I spoke of the times I cleaned their apartments, nursed them through illnesses, listened to their endless childhood dramas. I spoke of the hopes and dreams I had for them, the unwavering belief in their potential. As I laid out the financial details, the numbers spoke for themselves. The $50,000 asterisk for Sarah's undergraduate degree, the asterisk $70,000 for David's master's and business courses, the $20,000 asterisk wedding contribution, the asterisk $35,000 down payment for David's house, the endless smaller loans and gifts that added up to tens of thousands more, the estimate for Thomas's unpaid labor, easily another $40,000 over the years. The grand total, when I finally revealed it, was a staggering figure that made my stomach clench even as I spoke it aloud. Over $350,000. Over $250,000. My voice trembled slightly, not from weakness but from the sheer weight of that number, the lifetime of effort it represented. "This," I said, holding up a printed spreadsheet summary, "is the ledger of my love. This is the financial representation of every sacrifice, every deferred dream, every moment I put their needs before my own." I finished by explaining my decision to cut ties. They called me toxic for setting boundaries, for finally saying no. But what they define as toxic was simply me reclaiming my own life, my own financial future, my own peace of mind. "I am not a villain," I concluded, looking directly into the lens, my eyes burning with a quiet intensity. "I am a mother who gave everything, and in return was discarded. And now I am simply Evelyn Hayes, finally choosing herself." When I finished, the silence in the room was profound. Thomas came over and gently squeezed my shoulder. "You did it, Evie," he whispered. "You told your truth." Uploading the video felt like stepping off a cliff. My heart pounded in my chest. What would they say? What would others say? But as I clicked publish, a strange sense of peace washed over me. The truth was out. The ledger was balanced. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt truly, completely free. The immediate aftermath of uploading the video was a slow burn, then an explosion. For the first few hours, nothing. Just a handful of views, likely friends of mine who had found it through Thomas's quiet sharing. I felt a surge of doubt. Had I done the right thing? Would anyone even care? Then, the first comment came, not from a friend, but a stranger. "Wow. Just wow. This is incredibly brave." Then another. "My heart breaks for you, Evelyn. This sounds so familiar." And then the deluge. Someone, somewhere, picked up the video. Perhaps a smaller YouTube channel that curated stories of family drama. Perhaps a Facebook group dedicated to toxic family discussions, but from the parent's perspective. Or perhaps one of Sarah's or David's friends, seeing the title, clicked out of morbid curiosity. Within 24 hours, the views climbed into the thousands. By the end of the week, it was hundreds of thousands. My phone, usually quiet, now buzzed incessantly with notifications. Comments flooded in, overwhelmingly supportive. "This is exactly what happened to my parents. The entitlement of some kids is disgusting. You are a queen for doing this. Receipts. Receipts. This is the ultimate mic drop. Thank you for sharing your story. It made me realize I need to set boundaries too. Your children are narcissistic. Period." My video, a quiet act of self-preservation, had become a viral sensation. It resonated with countless others who felt unheard, unappreciated, and financially drained by their adult children. It struck a nerve, but with the positive comments came the negative. The trolls, and inevitably the backlash from Sarah and David. I didn't hear from them directly at first. Instead, I saw new posts emerge. Sarah, with a tearful selfie video, lamenting the public abuse she was suffering. My own mother, she sobbed, is trying to destroy my reputation because I chose to prioritize my mental health. This is exactly why I had to cut her off. The gaslighting, the manipulation. She spun a tale of victimhood so elaborate, so devoid of self-awareness, that it made my blood run cold. She didn't mention the money, of course. Not a word about the ledger. David's response was more aggressive, more calculated. He didn't make a video. Instead, he posted a long, scathing text statement. He called my video a grotesque display of maternal narcissism. He claimed my fabricated spreadsheet was an attempt to control his narrative and undermine his hard-earned success. He accused me of being emotionally unstable and obsessed with money, conveniently forgetting that all that money was mine before it became his. He implied I was exploiting their names for internet fame. He, too, avoided any mention of the actual financial figures. His friends rallied around him. "Don't let her get to you, man. She's just jealous of your success. Typical boomer parent, can't handle their kids having independent lives." The comments section of my video became a battleground. Supporters fiercely defended me, pointing out the hypocrisy of Sarah and David. Detractors called me a monster, a terrible mother, toxic, the very word they had used to describe me. It was overwhelming. I found myself glued to the screen, watching the numbers climb, the comments scroll. Thomas tried to shield me, reminding me to step away, to ignore the negativity. But it was like a car crash. I couldn't look away. My life, our private pain, was now dissected and debated by millions of strangers. One evening, my phone rang. It was my sister, Clara, her voice trembling. "Evelyn, are you okay? I just saw Sarah's video and David's post." "What is going on?" I explained everything, my voice tired. Clara, who had always been a quiet observer, listened patiently. "They're awful, Evie," she finally said, her voice firm. "They're absolutely awful. And you are so brave. Don't you dare regret this." Her unwavering support was a balm to my soul. The hardest calls were from friends who had seen the posts. Some were understanding, knowing the full extent of my generosity. Others, however, had been swayed by Sarah's tearful performance or David's authoritative tone. "Evelyn, are you sure this was the right way to handle it?" one friend cautiously asked. "Maybe you should have just talked to them privately." The implication, unsaid but clear, was that I was the one escalating the situation, the one being toxic. The public nature of it all was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it brought validation from strangers who understood. On the other, it exposed me to a level of scrutiny and judgment I had never imagined. It felt like I was standing naked in the town square, my life story ripped open for all to see, to praise, to condemn. But amidst the chaos, one truth stood firm: the numbers, the undeniable, meticulously documented numbers. They were facts, not emotions, and facts, I believed, would ultimately prevail. The firestorm intensified, but so did my resolve. The comments from strangers who shared similar stories fortified me. Their cries of, "Me too," and "Finally, someone is saying it," validated my pain and my decision. The media, too, began to take notice. First, smaller blogs and online forums, then major news outlets. I received requests for interviews, for follow-up stories. I politely declined most, choosing to let the video speak for itself. I wasn't seeking fame. I was seeking justice for my truth. However, the relentless public scrutiny forced a deeper, more uncomfortable self-reflection. Was I truly blameless? Had my love, in its boundless generosity, inadvertently fostered their entitlement? Had I crossed the line from support to enabling? Thomas and I talked for hours, late into the night. He too had been reflecting. We wanted to give them everything we didn't have, he said, staring into the flickering embers of our fireplace. But maybe we gave them too much. Maybe we taught them that money and our support would always be there, without effort from their side. I remembered the times I had smoothed over their failures, paid off their debts, rescued them from financial scrapes they had created themselves. Each time, I thought I was being a good mother, protecting them from hardship, but perhaps I was preventing them from learning the hard lessons of consequences, of personal responsibility. The video wasn't just about them. It was also, in a way, about me. It was my painful admission that my approach to mothering, born of love and good intentions, had, in their case, gone terribly awry. It was a reckoning with my own patterns, my own inability to say no when it mattered most. This period was agonizing, to face not only their betrayal but also my own unwitting complicity in creating the dynamic. But it was also liberating. It stripped away the last vestiges of guilt, replacing it with a clear-eyed understanding. I had given them my best. I had given them everything. And if they chose to interpret that as toxic, then the problem was not my love, but their perception. Then came the turning point. A major news publication, which I had initially declined to speak with, published an article titled, "The Toxic Parent Trend: When Adult Children Weaponize Therapy Speak Against Generous Parents." The article cited my video, analyzed the patterns of financial exploitation, and brought in psychologists and family therapists who spoke about, quote, covert financial abuse and adult children's entitlement. The article didn't take sides, but it framed the discussion in a way that highlighted the systemic issues at play, giving intellectual weight to my emotional testimony. It discussed how social media could amplify false narratives, and how the language of therapy, when misused, could become a tool for manipulation. This shift in the public conversation was crucial. It moved beyond a simple "he said," "she said," and into a broader societal critique. It provided context, not just for my situation, but for countless others. Suddenly, Sarah and David's narrative began to crumble. Their tearful videos and aggressive posts now looked less like genuine expressions of pain and more like desperate attempts at damage control. The comments on their posts started to change. "Where's your mom's side of the story? Did you actually pay her back for any of that? If she's so toxic, why did she pay for your wedding?" The uncomfortable truth, meticulously documented in my ledger, was beginning to seep into the public consciousness, slowly eroding the carefully constructed facade of their victimhood. They had underestimated the power of receipts. They had underestimated the quiet resilience of a mother scorned. As the media spotlight intensified and public opinion began to turn, the nature of the backlash shifted. Sarah and David's posts grew less frequent, then ceased altogether. The vitriol in my video's comment section subsided, replaced by more reasoned debate or continued support. It was as if the wind had gone out of their sails. The silence from them was deafening, yet strangely peaceful. No more demands, no more passive-aggressive posts, no more veiled accusations. The thread, finally, was truly severed. I heard snippets through mutual acquaintances, whispers, never direct communication. Sarah apparently was struggling with her wellness brand. The negative publicity from my video had made potential investors wary. Her narrative of being a victim of a toxic mother now rang hollow against the backdrop of a mother who had funded her entire life. Clients who valued authenticity were beginning to question her sincerity. David, ever the pragmatist, was reportedly furious. His carefully cultivated image as a self-made success story was tarnished. Colleagues at his finance firm, aware of the viral video, were subtly distancing themselves. His professional network, built on an illusion, was starting to unravel. The public perception of his entitlement was a liability in a competitive industry. I felt a strange mix of emotions, not triumph, not exactly, more a profound sadness for what could have been. I hadn't wanted to destroy their lives. I had merely wanted to reclaim mine, and in doing so, expose the truth of their actions. The consequences they now faced were a direct result of their own choices, their entitlement, their ingratitude, and their public betrayal. Thomas and I slowly began to rebuild our lives. The money we had saved, once destined for their endless needs, was now ours. We finally fixed the roof, updated the kitchen, and started planning a small, well-deserved trip. The weight that had been on our shoulders for decades began to lift. The video continued to garner views, becoming a reference point in discussions about family dynamics and financial abuse. I occasionally checked the comments, still touched by the sheer number of people who thanked me for speaking my truth. It had become more than just my personal story. It was a rallying cry for parents everywhere. One afternoon, months after the video went viral, I received an unexpected email. It was from David. The subject line was simply, "Mom, my heart hammered." I hesitated, then opened it. The email was short, formal, and devoid of genuine apology. He acknowledged the misunderstanding and the unfortunate public dispute. He didn't admit to any wrongdoing, but rather suggested that perhaps we both reacted poorly, and that it would be beneficial for us to find a way to move forward, for the sake of appearances, if nothing else. He hinted that the negative attention was impacting his career, and implied that if I were to retract the video or issue a public statement supporting them, things could return to normal. I read it twice. The audacity. The complete lack of understanding of the depth of his betrayal. He still saw me as a means to an end, a problem to be managed for his own benefit. There was no remorse, no understanding of the emotional devastation he had caused. I showed it to Thomas. He read it, then crumpled the paper into a tight ball. "No, Evie," he said, his voice firm. "Absolutely not." I nodded. My initial reaction had been a flicker of hope, a hope for reconciliation, for the son I once knew. But that flicker was quickly extinguished by the cold, calculating nature of his message. He didn't want a mother, he wanted a public relations solution. I typed a reply, brief and to the point. "David, I have seen your email. There is nothing to misunderstand. The facts are in the ledger. My video accurately reflects the truth of our financial history and your subsequent actions. I have no intention of retracting my video or issuing any statement. The appearances you refer to are your responsibility, not mine. I wish you well, Evelyn." I hit send. It was the hardest email I had ever written. And it was the most freeing. I never heard from Sarah or David again, not directly. Sometimes, I would see their names in the news or hear of their struggles through the grapevine. There was no joy in their difficulties, only a profound sense of closure. My video, they called me toxic for cutting them off. I responded with 30 years of receipts, remains online. It stands as a testament, a digital monument to a mother's love, a child's entitlement, and the unwavering power of truth. It is not a tale of revenge, but one of self-preservation, of reclaiming dignity, and of finding peace after a lifetime of giving. I still believe in love, but now I also believe in boundaries. I believe in self-worth. And I believe that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself, and perhaps even for your children, is to finally close the ledger and walk away. And for the first time in a very long time, I am truly, completely Evelyn Hayes. And that, I realize, is enough.